Hi, I'm Ben, welcome back to my channel. Today, shockingly, we're going to be talking about books, but more specifically, we're talking about books that have come into my possession in one way or another over the last 6 months. In general, I don't tend to do too many pure book haul videos. I think the last one I did was back in December. I try and keep the balance on this channel a little bit tipped more towards books that I've read rather than books that I've just bought, and partly that's because I find it personally a bit more interesting to share some insights on a book or some opinions rather than just telling you that something exists. So I don't tend to talk about books that I haven't read unless it's connected to a vlog or an event or some book prize speculation, which you know I love. I'm also conscious sometimes that these big escalating book haul videos can suggest that you need to have money and spend a load of money on books in order to meaningfully participate on Booktube, which just isn't the case at all. If any of the books I share today do interest you, there is no imperative that you need to go out and buy them. If you can, that's great. It's awesome, it supports publishers, but if not, hopefully you can access these books via your library or some subscription service like Scribd or Libro.fm. All of that said, I do buy a fair amount of books and I'm fortunate to be able to do that, and I thought about halfway through the year is a good chance to share with you what's been on my radar and started appearing on my shelves. It is actually quite nice for me to be able to give you an idea of what interests me and makes me pick up a book, and to share some of my expectations about it before it appears at a wrap-up, hopefully at some point in the future. Anyway, I don't know why I'm hand-wringing so much trying to justify making this video. I've made it, you've clicked it, so let's dive in. I've got about 30 books here in total, so this is going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour so that this video isn't too long, and to make it digestible I have grouped them into some at times loose categories, but I'll turn those into chapters and you can just jump around the bits that you're most interested in. The first grouping is kind of wild to me because I never expected this to be the case on this channel when I started it, but that is books that have been sent to me by publishers, and I've got 4 of them. The first one is Chain Gang All Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. This has been published very recently in the UK by Harville Secker, which is an imprint of Vintage, and there has been so much hype about this book. If that has passed you by, I'll give you a quick précis. This is a near future dystopia where in the American prison system, which I believe is already privatized, but it has gone full capitalist hellscape. And what the situation is that prisoners can choose to enroll in the Chain Gang All Stars program, which gives them the opportunity to essentially fight to the death in large stadiums, in televised sporting events. And if they win enough times, if they survive for long enough, they can win their freedom. It's a really searing political commentary, and I've actually already read this and loved it, and I'll be talking a bit more in depth about it in my July wrap-up. But yeah, this has been everywhere at the moment, so very exciting for Adjei-Brenyah. Then we have Between Dog and Wolf by Christina Gocheeva-Newbury. This is published by the Indigo Press, and I know I'm becoming a bit of a meme at this point by mentioning Rian Bell by Priya Hine so many times, but basically the Indigo Press published that book. They saw my review and quite frankly my gushing about it, and they got in touch and asked, can we send you another book that we are publishing this year that we think you'll like? And I checked it out and it did sound really interesting to me. This has been published in the US already, I believe, under a different title, but it's about 4 teenagers who are experiencing the death throes of the Soviet Union. I'm expecting friendship, I'm expecting love, I'm expecting a bit of politics, and I think it's just trying to bring to life the experience of a whole generation of people in Russia who I guess went through some tough times, some big change, and it sounds like a pretty emotional, gripping story. This one's out in October this year, so I'm going to try and give it a read before then and let you know what I think. Next, we've got Penance by Eliza Clark, published in the UK by Faber. I think this was actually published on the same day as Chain Gang All Stars, so maybe that's like the Barbenheimer situation of the literary world at the moment. This is Clark's second book after her debut Boy Parts, which I read last year and was really smart, really funny, absolutely loved it. This is a very different book though. This is a bit of a fake true crime book set in a little coastal town called Crow-on-Sea about 3 girls who murder another girl from their school, or at least that's what we think at the start. The setup is that we are reading a republished work by a journalist who investigated the story, and I've actually started reading this one. It's my current read, and right from the off we get these unreliable narrator vibes. I have no idea where it's going, but I'm already hooked. Just the scene setting is very, very intriguing, and Eliza Clark's writing is just whip smart, really funny, taps into a lot of popular culture. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this, excited to see where it goes. Last but not least from publishers is The Future by Adam Thirlwell. This is published by Jonathan Cape, another imprint of Vintage, and I have no idea what to expect from this book. The blurb suggests that it's a historical novel set in the 18th century. It's about a woman called Celine who has a bunch of lies made up about her and her sex life and her sexuality, and then she goes on an urgently contemporary quest, which the blurb suggests goes to the moon. And indeed, the front cover has a Renaissance lady on the moon. So who knows what this is going to be like, but it has some really amazing authors who have blurbed it. Colm Tóibín on the front, and then on the back we've got Sheila Heti and Salman Rushdie, both saying glowing things about this book. This could be a quiet booker contender, so we'll see. This is another finished copy that I've been sent, which is really, really kind of Vintage. So very interested in this one because it sounds like it could be a little bit of a mind bender. Right, the next grouping I've got is a little bit of a hodgepodge, and the one after actually is similarly a bit of a mixture of things. But this one is a combination of some novels in translation, but then there are also some novels with gay themes, and then there's one that is both translated and gay. So I just put them all together and I thought I'd talk through all of those ones. The first of those is Time Shelter by Georgi Gospodinov. This is translated from the Bulgarian by Angela Rodel. This is the winner of the International Booker Prize this year, but from the long list, this was the one that most intrigued me, and I actually picked it up before it was even shortlisted. Sadly, haven't gotten around to reading it yet, but the premise just sounds great. So this is about a clinic that aims to treat Alzheimer's by creating, in lots of minute detail, different time periods on different floors of its building, with the aim that it would bring back memories and stuff for those people. However, lots of healthy people start turning up and seeking help from the clinic in order to escape from the horrors of the present. And that just feels kind of timely at the moment, given the unprecedented heat waves being experienced across Europe and the wider world. But also, I guess there's quite a lot of political turmoil at the moment. So yeah, I'm not sure whether this is going to touch on climate or populism or both, but super interested to read this one, and that International Booker win is a nice vindication of my interest. Then from one International Booker winner to another, we've got The Vegetarian by Han Kang. This is translated from Korean by Deborah Smith. I don't actually know tons about this short little novel, but I've heard great things. I believe this is told from the perspective of a husband whose wife has decided that she's going to become vegetarian and stop eating meat, but then it turns into something altogether a bit more weird and erotically charged, and is a bit of a psychological thriller. But yeah, beyond that, it's so short that I feel like I could just dive into that sight unseen and see how I feel about it. The next book is All the Lovers in the Night by Miyoko Kawakami. This is translated from Japanese by Sam Bett and David Boyd. Actually, this is signed. This was a gift from Matt for my birthday, which I was very pleased to receive. And this is going to be the second Kawakami book I will have read. I read Heaven not that long ago and really enjoyed it. It was a pretty brutal coming-of-age-ish school-time story about bullying primarily. So I would check the trigger warnings before you dive into that one, but I really enjoyed it, and I respected it a little bit more when I found out after that there was actually a lot of philosophy, and there was a lot of philosophical metaphors, stand-ins for certain thinkers throughout history in that book. This, I think, is a little bit more of a straightforward story about love and about a woman who is trying to find her way in life. I think Kawakami is a really good writer, and I enjoyed Heaven kind of intellectually, but I'm really intrigued to see what she can make me feel with this one. Again, this has had a lot of praise thrown upon it. A lot of people giving this 5 stars. So I'm super interested. I expect many people watching this might have read this one, so interested to hear what you thought of it. Right, now we've got our crossover book, which is both translated and gay and unites this whole category, and that is Lie With Me by Philippe Besson. This is translated from the original French by Molly Ringwald, whose name you might recognise actually more as an actor. She was in some of those big 80s hits like The Breakfast Club and 16 Candles, but this is her first ever translation, which is really cool. This is about a man in France who is a famous writer. He spots a young person who looks a bit like his first male love. And then we get a bit of a flashback to that time when he was 17 and experiencing his first relationship. I'm not sure beyond that what the vibe of this book is, whether it's supposed to be loving and heartwarming, or if there is tragedy afoot, as is often the case with gay love stories, which is a bit of a shame really. But yeah, beyond that, it helps that this is quite a beautiful object. I'm not super into books with faces on, but I think this cover design is really nice. And this beautifully has French flaps, which I am just a sucker for very aesthetically shallow reasons. Next is an Australian book, and actually I really enjoy how much cheerleading and encouragement to read Australian fiction I see in the comments on this channel, and maybe this purchase is somehow connected to that. I don't know, maybe your encouragement is working. This is Marlowe by J. Carmichael, and I think I originally saw this on Simon Savage's channel and him saying he was quite excited about it. This is about 2 men, another gay love story. One of them, I think, moves from a small town to the big city to sort of escape the prejudice and restrictions on them being who they are. But I think they find it similarly constraining. And so this is about, I guess, love and how it can overcome being suppressed by society. Interestingly, this has a bunch of pictures littered throughout, and I'm kind of intrigued to know how those factor in. Maybe one of the characters is a photographer or something, or perhaps they're just there to bring things to life a little. But yeah, it sounds super interesting. Right, the final book in this grouping is Patrick Gale's Mother's Boy. This is a fictional retelling of the life of the poet Charles Causley, who grew up in a small town, Launceston, which I believe is in Cornwall. Please correct me if that's wrong. But yeah, it's set in sort of the interwar period where the world is dealing with the aftermath of the First World War, and I guess the growing issues that will lead to the Second World War. And it's about this young man and his relationship with his mother and his experience of growing up and contending with what it means to be queer in that time. It just sounds really lovely. I've been waiting for it to come out in paperback for a while. I thought it might have been in with a shout for the Booker Prize last year, but sadly didn't make it. And Gale seems like a fairly underappreciated author. He's got quite a lot of novels, I think. Yeah, he's got absolutely tons of books that he's released. What are the ones that I really liked? A Place Called Winter, I've heard really good things about as well. But yeah, this will be my first experience reading Patrick Gale, and I'm very excited about it. My second hodgepodge category is a mixture of non-fiction and climate fiction. And then there's one that's kind of like natural non-fiction, which I think is the bridge. Let's just go with it. The first one is Margot Jefferson's Constructing a Nervous System. Now, part of my interest in this book, I will shamefully say, is just how beautiful that cover art is. It is absolutely stunning. But it also is a book that has been very highly praised. Margot Jefferson is a previous recipient of the Pulitzer Prize, not for fiction, but for one of the other categories. And she writes a lot about her experiences of race and privilege and labour. And this just sounds really great. It also won the Rathbones Folio Prize. So it won both the non-fiction prize, and then there's an overall prize across all the categories. I think this was the non-fiction one, Scary Monsters was the fiction one, but this one overall. And so I think this is going to be really hard-hitting, challenging, super interesting, and probably quite eye-opening. And I am really, really interested in hearing what Margot Jefferson has to say. The next non-fiction book is one by one of my favourite authors, really, George Saunders. I've just realised that the sticker is still on this book. This is his... Actually, I'm saying this is non-fiction, but it's kind of both, right? Because this is A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. And essentially, this is George Saunders turning, I guess, what he teaches in creative writing into a book that is accessible and digestible by everyone. So this is a reflection on how some of the Russian masters of short stories achieve what they do with their writing. And so there are a lot of short stories in here, but then analysis of those short stories and what really makes them tick. I think he's such an excellent short story writer that what he recognises and says about these stories is probably just super illuminating and may make you, or make me, if I read this, a more conscious reader, able to recognise what the author is trying to achieve. And I put quite a lot of stock in authorial intent when I'm reading and when I'm reviewing and rating books, because I think that's important. I don't think it's super fair to judge a book on something that the author isn't trying to do. Anyway, I'm rambling at this point, but basically, I think this is going to teach me about how to become a better reader. Right, the non-fiction book, which I think is a bridge into the climate fiction, is Other Lands, A World in the Making by Thomas Halliday. And frustratingly, this doesn't have a blurb, so it's hard to know exactly what it's about, but I believe this is a bit of a literary biography of the Earth, but it covers landscapes and fauna and plant life that doesn't exist anymore. So it's all about, I guess, what we could be experiencing in the years to come as human-driven climate change creates the next mass extinctions. I think this is just going to be really interesting, really gripping, and it will help me to read a little bit more non-fiction, because I really don't read enough non-fiction. I find it quite hard to, I guess, find stuff that I'm really interested in, but science and nature are definitely ones for me. Moving seamlessly then from science and nature to climate fiction, I've got 3 books to talk to you about here, and the first is Migrations by Charlotte McConaughey. This is by the same author as a book that I've seen quite a lot on Booktube and Bookstagram, which is Once There Were Wolves, about reintroducing wolves into the Scottish Highlands, which I really am interested in, but for some reason it's not out in paperback in the UK until September 2024, and it came out ages ago in hardback, so I don't know what the hold up is there, whether they're trying to get their ducks in a row to give it a big publicity push. But this one is her previous novel. It's about a woman who is travelling to the Arctic or the Antarctic or something like that to follow some birds who are doing what might be the last migration to the Antarctic. And I think it weaves together both, climate catastrophe and ecological collapse with the main character's sort of personal history and demons and what she is running away from in her life. So it sounds very interesting. I hope it's well researched, because I love a well researched book. And yeah, the New York Times book review says that the novel's prose soars, so that sounds great. Another book that does a lot of weaving is Daisy Hildyard's Emergency. This actually recently won the Encore Award, which is a pretty cool concept. It's an award that gives out a prize to the author with the best second book, because there's a lot on debut authors and debut novels setting the tone for your career, but it's really nice that something recognises a good second effort as well. This is a pastoral novel set in the 90s in Yorkshire, and it's all about, I guess, the interconnectedness of all things, of nature, of lives, of local communities, and bigger things at work across the world. We are more connected than ever. I think this is going to be about how a breakdown in some of those connections can really poison the entire system. But I've heard it's quite a quiet, contemplative novel, quite pastoral. And so I'm not 100% sure that it's going to work for me. It might be a little plotless. Maybe it won't be. Maybe I'm being unfair and thinking it might be. But I was very lucky to find a copy of this in like a sale shelf at my local indie bookshop, and it was half price. So I thought, why not give it a go? Right, the final book in this grouping is Venomous Lumpsucker by Ned Bowman, which I think is the best title of this entire video. And I really like the cover. Matt got me this for my birthday as well, against his better judgment, because he was kind of repulsed by what was on the cover, which I think is this ugly fish that the book is about. Essentially, there is a fish called the Venomous Lumpsucker, which is supposed to be the most intelligent fish on the planet, but may have just gone extinct. And no one cares in the slightest except for two people that don't like each other, but they team up to go on the hunt for this fish. And then apparently get drawn into some larger conspiracy. I really like what I've read of Ned Bowman, which is actually only one book, Boxer Beetle, which I read a few years ago now, but I found it really smart and funny and just a bit of a romp to read. I know Ned Bowman's been a little bit, not controversial as a person, but I think controversial as an author. Some have described him as quite smug and self-satisfied and just trying to show off how clever he is. But from what I've read, I really enjoyed that. So maybe I'm a sucker for someone who thinks they're clever. But anyway, I want to read this. I've also got his book, The Teleportation Accident, on my shelf, which I think has some time travel mind-bendiness about it, which is catnip for me. So I don't know why I haven't picked it up yet. And that was shortlisted for the Booker many years ago. Anyway, I'm rambling. This book sounds good, don't you think? The next grouping is just a bunch of books that are either thrillers or thriller adjacent, which I think might interest some people because I don't talk much about thrillers or read many thrillers on this channel at all, but I know there are a lot of thriller lovers out there. I've only got 3 books to talk about, but I'll be interested to know if you've read any of these and liked them. The first is Mouth to Mouth by Anton Wilson, and this is about a man who saves another man from drowning and then becomes a bit obsessed with him and weaves himself into his life somehow, and maybe ends up regretting saving the first dude. Why did I pick this up? I think it was on the What Page Are You On podcast. They were raving about how good this is. It could be one, I think, to take on holiday. And my understanding is that it starts out in an airport. So maybe it'd be fun to be sitting in an airport reading about 2 characters in an airport. I've also just noticed that it's a Barack Obama summer read. We trust Obama for great recs. Maybe I'll bump this one up my list. Then a book that people have been hyping a lot lately, and that is Carla by Colin Walsh, a pretty recent release, which when I visited London last week, I went to Foyles, the big one at, is it Charing Cross? Basically the flagship Foyles store, and I'd done a click and collect for this book because it was a few pounds cheaper to do it that way. And to my lovely surprise, they only had signed copies. So I managed to get a signed copy of this. This is set in a little seaside town in Ireland, and it's about 3 friends. I think it jumps between a summer in their lives in the early 2000s and then some stuff in the present day with them reflecting on what's happened in between. I believe it's a bit of a literary thriller. It combines like literary writing with page-turning plot. And Colin Walsh has said that it's kind of for fans of things like The Secret History, which is quite a bold claim. Fair play to him for reaching for that. But readers have said it's really beautifully written and is quite gripping. So I think I'm in for a good ride with this one. And then finally, this may be veering into like horror, gothic stuff more than thriller, but I've got Looking Glass Sound by Katrina Ward. And the reason I got this actually is because Willow from Books and Bow absolutely raved about this, and I loved the proof that she got that seemed to be annotated with like really weird personal references to her. So that was really cool. And I've not read Katrina Ward before. I really do need to read Last House on Needless Street because that's supposed to be pretty mind-blowing. What is this about? This is a book that I don't know too much about in terms of its plot, but I think it's got book within a book vibes. It's got a lot of unreliable narration. It's got deaths that may not really be true. And all of that sounds quite enticing, but also enticing in a way where I'd like to go into it as blind as possible. So I cannot tell you any more about this book. And if you spoil it in the comments, I don't know what I'll do. I've got no revenge options available to me. But please don't spoil it because I don't want it to be spoiled. Right, we are on to the penultimate grouping, and this is going to be sci-fi fantasy. Well, more sci-fi. I don't know if there's really any fantasy here. And actually, all but one of these books is from the Last Bookshop, which is like a £4 bookshop in Bristol, which is a great place to pick up a bargain. The first one is The Dark Net by Benjamin Percy. And the reason this was on my radar is that I was really interested in trying to find some books that were gonna melt my brain in a good way, because I really enjoy stuff like Blake Crouch's books. Recursion is fantastic and really gets you thinking to try and unpick the plot. I think it's just like a brilliantly done book. And I've also spoken about Love and Other Thought Experiments by Sophie Ward, which is one of my favourite books ever. And that too is kind of really hard to penetrate the real meaning of. And it really like blows your mind and makes you think and makes you feel really, really small in the universe. I wanted a few more reads that could do the same sort of thing. And so when I was researching that, I came across a Reddit thread that included a few people vouching for The Dark Net. I actually don't know too much about what it's about, but based on the blurb, it's about a 12-year-old who is blind and has her sight restored by some high-tech prosthetic. And then she starts seeing weird stuff. And I thought this was more of like a techno thriller, but it does say that there's an ancient and evil threat that might break loose in the world. So that sounds a bit more paranormal. So I don't know what to think now. Whatever happens, I'm sure it'll be quite interesting. Next is a book from an author that, to be honest, I'm a little bit ashamed not to have read by now, and that is Octavia Butler's Kindred. Butler is a really big name. She is a very celebrated author of science fiction, and Kindred is one of her most well-known works. This, I believe, is a book about time travel, about a man who summons this woman to save him whenever he's in trouble. And I think it has Butler doing something that she does quite a lot, which is weave together commentary on slavery and the plight of minority groups in the US with science fiction concepts in a really interesting way. And there was actually a really cool quote in here that says, "If you haven't read Butler, you don't yet understand how rich the possibilities of science fiction can be." If you're not sold on reading some Butler after that, then I don't know what could win you over. And then to go from one titan of science fiction to another, we've got The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin. And this is a very short novel by Le Guin about a group of people on a certain planet who are invaded by another group who are much more violent, and then the original group lower themselves and engage in the violence as well, which kind of undoes their entire world and their civilization. I've only read one Le Guin before, which was The Left Hand of Darkness, which at times I found quite a slog to get through. However, I thought the world building was just unbelievably good and thought-provoking. But I loved what she did with The Left Hand of Darkness, and I think she's celebrated for a reason. This seems like quite a short, sharp little novel, again with some big ideas. I don't know if this touches upon climate issues. She was writing in like the 60s, so I don't know how prominent those were in public discourse. So maybe this could have been in my climate fiction section, but I think either way, sounds very interesting. The next book is another one that I saw out when I was looking for things to melt my brain and make them dribble out of my ears, and that is Dan Simmons' Hyperion. This is a pretty hardcore sci-fi book, I imagine. And I did pick this up a while ago, but I've seen since that Kieran from KD Books did a review of it, which I haven't watched in full because I'm a little bit wary of spoilers. But I did find out from that it's based sort of kind of in conversation with Keats and Hyperion, some unfinished Keats epic poem, which is really cool, actually. This is a big, sprawling sci-fi epic about some pilgrims going off to a far-flung planet to investigate some time-travelling being that is torturing people or something. There's AI thrown in here, there's some secrets of the universe to be uncovered, and I just love the sound of that. And if I do love it, there are like 3 sequels to this book. So I will give it a go at some point, and I do feel a bit of a sci-fi era coming along, maybe after Booker Prize season, which will have precisely 0 sci-fi books. But yeah, I'm interested in getting to this one. Although the cover looks weird. What does this say to you? It looks like a butt down here and then like a spiky something. Final sci-fi book here was another gift from Matt. He treats me well, doesn't he? And that is Vagabonds by Hao Jing Fang, translated by Ken Liu, who, as well as being an author in his own right, translated The Three-Body Problem and its, or at least one of its sequels. I think someone else did the second book. Or was it the other way around? Did Ken Liu do book 2 and someone else did 1 and 3? I can't remember. But yeah, the reason I am interested in this is because I was kind of switched on to Chinese science fiction by the works by Cixin Liu, and so this is one that's also had really good things said about it. This is set in a, I guess not too distant future, about 200 years in the future, where there is a bit of a rift between Earth and then the colonies of Mars. And so some students are sent as some goodwill ambassadors from Earth to Mars, but then things break down and some lies are uncovered and some spicy space stuff goes on. And it all sounds very interesting. This is a very chunky book, so seems like it might be quite an engrossing read. And you know what? I like being engrossed. The final category then really isn't a category at all. It's just 6 books that I couldn't massively fit into any of the other categories, and so I will just take you through those and then we'll be done. I do recognise that my summaries are getting shorter and shorter as this video goes on, and I think it's because I'm conscious of how long this might end up being. So if I end up just whizzing through these in a sentence or 2 each, that's why. The first of these books is This One Sky a Day by Leonie Ross. This was longlisted for the Women's Prize last year. This has a different title in the US. It's called Poppy Show, which is where it is set. And on the island of Poppy Show, everyone has like some kind of little power. I always think of Simon Savage describing this as everyone's got a little summon something. And yeah, so it's got magical realism vibes. And I don't really know where it goes from there or what it does with that premise, but it is quite long. The only thing that slightly puts me off is, I'm sure it was it Anna on Eric Carl Anderson's channel saying that this is aggressively whimsical, and I'm not the biggest fan of whimsy in fiction, but I'm hoping that it has a little bit more edge, a little bit more bite to it, because Leonie Ross is a Caribbean author, and I find Caribbean fiction just really interesting and evocative and does some really cool stuff and challenges some of your preconceptions about what fiction needs to be and how it needs to be written. So I have hopes. I don't know how high they are, but they're not low. Let's put it that way. Next is The People in the Trees by Hanya Yanagihara. And we all know who Yanagihara is. We've all read A Little Life and we feel one way about it or we feel another way about it. This is Yanagihara's debut novel that she released a while back now, and this is set in 1950, and I believe it's about a man who goes out, I don't know if he's an anthropologist or a doctor. Oh, he's a doctor, and he goes out to a Micronesian island in search of a rumoured lost tribe, and I think what he discovers there is the secret to eternal youth. That is one of the only things I know about this book. The other is that it's fucked up. I did see, I think, a Goodreads review or some other discussion online where someone had read this and their only response was, "What is wrong with her?" Which doesn't put me off and may say more about me than it does about this book. But yes, I aim to complete my Yanagihara reading at some point soon. Okay, next is The Human Origins of Beatrice Porter and Other Essential Ghosts by Soraya Palmer. This is about, I think, two sisters and their family and how oral storytelling and folklore weave into their lives, how they're wrapped by these stories as kids and how they sort of come to fruition as they are growing up. This is a book that is eligible for the Booker, and that's probably my main interest in it. I kind of picked this up and then I did see Scott at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot not slate the book, but just say it didn't really achieve what he thought it was setting out to do really successfully. And so that lowered this in my expectations a little bit, but you never know, it could be really good. We'll see. Then we have The End of Night Work by Aidan Cottrell Boyce. Now, I've featured this on my channel already because I read it a couple of months ago and it was in a recent wrap-up. I actually got this from eBay for like £3. It's another one that could be in with a shout for the Booker Prize this year if the judges are so inclined. And I think it's a really interesting debut novel that explores some cool concepts, some really interesting philosophical ideas that it mulls over about differences between the old and the young, and what do the old owe the young, and what should the young expect from the world, in terms of, I guess, almost like resources that have been used up before young people even got to the scene. It's also got this really cool setup where the main character we're following has this certain condition that means he goes through what are called heterochronous shocks, and it means he doesn't age as usual people do, like every day he's a day older. He just stays the same until these massive events where he might age like 10 or 20 years, and it sets him up in a really unique position in this growing animosity between old people and young people in this world. I really respected what this novel did and I enjoyed reading it. I thought it was quite amusing and funny and thought-provoking, but I didn't love it. I'm just really interested to see what Aidan Cottrell Boyce does next. The next book I've got for you, or I've actually got it for me, is If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery. This appeared on so many best of 2022 lists last year, and so I couldn't really help but pick it up, and it's got this beautiful cover which actually looks like the sort of thing I might use in a thumbnail at some point. You can imagine my face plastered over these words. This is a set of linked short stories about, I think, a Jamaican family that moved to the US, and they deal with love and life and race and society, but also, as you might be able to tell from the cover, a big old hurricane that is closing in on them. This is another one actually that could potentially appear on the Booker long list if the judges think the work is unified enough. So short stories technically don't count, but if they are seen as telling one story, then it could be something in with a shout. I think this is going to be a really good read for me. Right, the very final book, and I'm going to have to be really quick here because my phone is running out of battery, but it is The Candy House by Jennifer Egan, and I managed to find this again in a Waterstones sale where it was half price, and by some stroke of crazy luck it was also signed, so it was an absolute bargain. I think the reason it was in that section was because, I don't know if you remember the dust jacket for this, it had like a window peeped out of it, and a lot of them kept getting ripped here, and so this one was ripped, and so it just ended up throwing away the dust jacket because the naked book is actually pretty cool. The premise of this is it's a bit of a sequel to Visit from the Goon Squad, which won the Pulitzer Prize for Jennifer Egan. I still haven't read that, although I did get a copy of that from a charity shop and it's on my shelf somewhere and I need to get around to it. This follows on from that and is set in the future where there is a company that offers you the opportunity to externalize all of your memories and consume them, I guess, outside of your own brain, which reminds me of a premise from Ted Chiang's Exhalation. One of the short stories has a similar thing going on there. So I'd be interested to see how that's done differently in this book. But obviously I need to get to Goon Squad first. Thank you very much, if you're still here, for sticking with me through all 30 of those new books. I'm really excited to read them, and I'd be really interested to hear from you what books out of those lot you've read and would recommend I bump up the list to read sooner rather than later. As ever, if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and you'd like to see more content from me, then hit the subscribe button wherever that may be on your device right now. And until next time, toodles.